Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Work with Magnet. Thank you for taking the time to join the IIoT ERP breakout session this afternoon. Today, I'm happy to welcome representatives from two companies that have quite a bit of knowledge and experience on this topic. Hiskey of Epicor, and Rob Moyer of ComTec Solutions. Sorry, Rob. So let's start off with some formal introductions of everybody. I'll start off. Again, I'm Joe Work with Magnet. I'm a senior growth advisor here in Northeast Ohio. One of my roles at Magnet is to lead our efforts to introduce small, medium manufacturers to advanced manufacturing technologies and help them implement it within their organizations. I'll be moderating the session and asking questions of Terry and Rob about our topic. Rob, how about giving us a little background about you and ComTec?
So Rob Moyer, president and owner of ComTec Solutions. We've been an Epicor partner for about 25 years. I actually came from the manufacturing sector as an Epicor customer, and we've been implementing small to mid-sized companies in the Northeast for that many years. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Joe.
You bet. Terry?
Hi, I'm Terri Hiskey. I am with Epicor. I'm based in Austin, Texas. I've got, probably about 25 years of experience actually marketing and working at manufacturing companies. So the topic of IIoT is a specific kind of passion of mine because I think it's really something that can be a game changer, especially for our small and mid-sized manufacturers.
Thanks, Terry. So I'd like to set the stage for today's session a little bit, kind of go into why did we even pick this topic for the breakout session. A little bit of background. This year, Magnet rolled out an IIoT pilot program that targeted small and medium sized manufacturers in the area. The program provides an opportunity for companies to test the waters with regard to IIoT technology in what we think is kind of a low risk environment. So during our engagements on these projects, we noticed a common theme coming to the surface. The leadership of these companies that we were working with expressed an interest in how IIoT and ERP platforms might be integrated. When a company kicks off a IoT project, they soon realize that they now have multiple data streams that they're working with. And it comes to surface as, well, I've got these two sources of data. How can I better maybe integrate them to get more value? With IIoT being kind of the new kid on the block and ERP systems being around for a while, relatively long time comparatively speaking, we thought it might be interesting to dig into the topic and see how this idea comes to fruition in reality within the manufacturing community. So we're going to talk about merging the data streams and touch on what you might want to consider if it comes to light that you're interested in doing so in your organization. Before we start with the official discussion with Rob and Terry, I'd like to take a really short poll and find out where all you are with regard to IIoT and ERP systems. So if you could take just a second and answer this simple poll, do you have an ERP system? Do you have an IoT system? Do you have both? Or you don't have either? Just take a second and do that. It'd be great. Just kind of get a temperature of the audience here. And while you're doing that, I'll just explain the format a little bit. So we're going to start with asking Terry and Rob a series of questions to obtain their insight and comments with regard to their experiences on this topic. And then after that, we'll turn it over to you all out in the audience to see if you've got some follow-up questions that you might be interested in. So it looks like 50% of the people that have tuned in have an ERP system, 10% have both, and 40% don't have either. But nobody has just a specific IoT system integrated in their facility. Okay, so thanks for participating in that. Erica, could you change the slide, please? Okay, so we're going to start off with the first question here. So what are the primary use cases for an ERP and IoT platform for small and medium-sized businesses? And has this changed with what's been going on in the world recently?
Did you want me to take that, Joe, or Rob?
Sure, Terri. Terri, you can hop in first, and then Rob, if you've got something you'd like to add, please feel free to do so.
Sure. So, I think the reason people are looking for IIoT is cost, and also productivity and making processes a little bit faster, a little bit more accurate, and consistent. And I think that a lot of the things that have happened during this period of the pandemic have kind of exposed the weaknesses of a lot of companies, especially when it comes to skill shortages. For example, a lot of folks ended up leaving the workforce during shutdowns and not returning. There's a lot of, when you think about certain companies, especially if they had more than one site, might have had to cut down their labor, yet still maintain these different sites. And so you need a solution that can help you still monitor these critical processes, these critical machines that you might have going in order for you to, get the efficiencies out of them. The less people you have looking after machines, the more risk there is. And with IIoT, you can do something, we've heard all the use cases. You can put a sensor on a machine and monitor whatever parameter you need to monitor, whether it's kind of volume, velocity, pressure, fluid levels, temperature, all of these critical things that might cause some sort of breakdown in the process. With IIoT, you're able to monitor those easier from a different location, even on a mobile device, versus having somebody on site monitoring them. And so I think, a lot of current issues have impacted how and why people are looking at adopting these technologies because of enforcing social distance standards in order to get more productivity, in order for if you have less labor force on hand, you can actually, again, remotely monitor things that maybe perhaps you had someone physically taking a look at. So, those three things alone, I would say, are definitely drivers. They were drivers before the pandemic, I think, in terms of adopting IIoT, but certainly all of the things that have come from the pandemic with reduced workforce and social distancing and things have driven, I think, more companies to look at that as a solution to help out with moving forward now as we get through this pandemic.
Okay, thanks. So from a magnet perspective, and like I mentioned before, we got these pilot programs and we're trying to kind of grease the skids for companies to get some experience and interest in more advanced manufacturing and IoT specifically. Our experience, to be kind of blunt about it, has been that it's kind of tough for some of these smaller companies to actually get interested in taking this on. Have either of you seen any shifts in how companies have been more interested in this technology? And if so, do you think there's specific things that are driving it? And Terri, if you happen to have some comments on that to follow up.
Sure. Again, we've had a couple of use cases with customers that I would say, were dabbling in IIoT and just kind of experimenting to see, what it was, what it could do. But I have a specific use case. Actually, we have a customer based in Europe that is precision metal fabricator, and they actually talked to us about their increased adoption of IoT during this time, because right during the period of the initial shutdown of the pandemic, they had machines that they had to monitor fluid levels on. And they're not a 24/7 machine factory, they actually close down for the night and then start back up. But overnight, while there was no one in the factory, one of the machines flooded. There was just way too much fluid in the machines, and it actually caused them to shut down for 2 or 3 days because it flooded their whole shop. And they realized how critical it was to, they were like, wow, that's it. We need to start monitoring fluid levels that, sends us alerts so that we know if there's an issue right away, so that if we're not there for that overnight shift, we can send somebody in right away to get going with that. So that was kind of a use case that really started their greater adoption of IIoT across all of their machines, because that incident happened right at the beginning of the pandemic, unfortunately, when they didn't have people on site, and it really, caused them again a shutdown of several days. So, that's one specific use case.
Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? And I guess this kind of taps into what we just talked about relative to how companies are thinking of the different use cases. Can we go to the next slide, Erica?
Hey, Joe, while you're switching to that next slide, I would just add a couple of points. One, we're seeing more customers starting to look at some of their the carbon footprints that they're trying to track, and they're using IoT for tracking their electrical consumption and some of their environmental concerns. And the other thing that we're seeing quite a bit is these smaller companies are just having a hard time finding skilled laborers, skilled workforce. And so anything they can do to automate is going to help the situation, because they're just not seeing them out there.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think one of the things that we've seen here at Magnet is that companies are looking to leverage their existing core teams more, as opposed to trying to find new workers out there in the field. And by being able to utilize some automated systems, even if it's data collection and analysis that you might get with an IoT, and then feeding that to your ERP system, you're able to leverage those people more and allow them to do other things, as opposed to doing some of the more menial tasks. Let's see, Erica, can you flip through this? Looks like we've got, there you go. So another question to throw out there. So let's say a company is starting with a clean slate. They don't have an ERP system. They don't have an IIoT system in place. What are some of the key features that you think they should consider of those different platforms, especially if they're interested in eventually merging them together?
You want to take this first, Rob?
Well, I think, they really need to, when you start looking at selection of an ERP system, if I understand the question correctly, what they should be looking at really is we try to drive towards the business objectives and not the feature function of the software. So they really need to look at why they're doing it. I had this discussion with an individual earlier today, right around this subject, where you've got to look at what you're trying to track and the business benefits of tracking it, and not just say, I want to go in and track these 10 things, because if you try and track them without really having that benefit defined, you're not going to see the return on it at the end of it.
Completely agree, Rob. I mean, I think that so when you think about ERP and IIoT, they have different objectives, right? ERP is to capture all of the financial data, all of your costs, so you really understand and have visibility into end-to-end, how much it costs to bring something to market. I think IIoT is almost, to me, like a helper into that. It's an adjacent product to that. I wouldn't say it's an either or product, So with the power of IoT, as we've talked about, certainly there's the maintenance and kind of early warning, system scenario. But when you start to build a real IT strategy around this and start bringing in other technologies that a system like Epicor ERP, especially cloud-based system, can help you connect to IoT and then layer in on top of that like AI. That's when you start to really see the power of the two of them work together, because now you could have sensor on a machine, something's wrong, and your AI that you have layered on top, which you bring in through your ERP system, can sense, oh, this is not a normal thing. And so not only does it alert you something's wrong, maybe your AI system will then put forward a solution for you. Do you want me to schedule maintenance? Do you want me to shut this line down? Do you want me to move production to another line, for example? And so I think that when you think about the power of how they all work together, they certainly play different roles. And so I think it's more thinking holistically what your overall strategy is. But to Rob's point as well, you really need to think about what it is when you think about IoT, what it is you want to track. We also get a lot of questions about, we understand IoT from our customers, but our customers telling us we get IoT, but we don't know what we want, tell us what we should measure. Tell us what we should do. And we kind of go back and say, well, where are your pain points? What is it that you want to track? And what are your baselines? Because unless you have that, you're going to be collecting a bunch of data that kind of is meaningless without a baseline.
So that's a really interesting couple points there. So, from what Rob mentioned, I guess the emphasis there is you don't necessarily put technology in place for technology's sake. You really got to have a real business reason for doing it. And then, Terri, what you mentioned about, you kind of touched on, AI. From a IoT perspective, you got a lot of data coming in from various things production-wise, or maybe even maintenance. It sounds like by marrying that production data or even maintenance machine data with the ERP system, you can gain even more insight into what's going on on the production floor, and maybe not only that, but what you can do about it.
Correct. Like you can start to trigger actions too and produce actions so that it's not just a static kind of something's going wrong, you need to check it, but it does take that process a step further and give the user options then around, okay, what's the next step I need to make? Which, going back to Rob's point about workforce and that there are less people, kind of coming back to the workforce, or, not enough people to fill out, companies, especially small companies, could use solutions like this because it takes less people then to, start that process. If you've got your technology that's kind of guiding you through what that solution should be, that helps with the knowledge gap that a new worker might have if they come across something like this. So, if they get an alert that says, hey, your fluid level's down, they're a new employee. They may not know what to do. But if their system says, would you like me to reschedule? Would you like to change production? That guides that new employee into, a process that will, guide him to a solution.
And so it sounds like that might be really interesting to be able to implement for a multi-shift environment where maybe you don't have all those decision makers on second or third shift that you might have on first shift. And so you might be able to ride through those issues.
Correct.
Okay. Let's see here. Let's take a look at it. Let's put another slide up there, Erica. All right. So I guess from an overall, business perspective, business leadership, are there, and we mentioned, Rob mentioned earlier the comment about, you got to have a business plan and you got to understand what your business wants to achieve by implementing these systems. Are there any other kind of tiered, considerations that the top management of a company should consider when they're looking at these platforms?
I think, I really think it's having that kind of broader vision and not limiting yourself. We don't, there's so many newer technologies that are out that we, I think, don't even understand what the impact is going to be, 2 or 3 years or 4 years from now. But you want to make sure that you're investing in technology that I call is what we say at Epicor, that is future proof. That when you're making this investment, it doesn't mean that when the next technology comes out, you're obsolete, that you're able to actually add that into your technology. So again, something like AI, which is a new solution for Epicor as well. We've just had it maybe a year and a half or so, and it's a solution. We have something called Epicor Virtual Assistant, which is AI enabled, and she's kind of in her infancy right now. She can do some basic things. She can take orders and do some things, but the more people use her, the bigger she will, the better she gets. And so I think it's kind of one of those things where you just need to make sure that you are not kind of investing piecemeal, but I would say really have a vision for what you want your system to be, and that you need to leave it open enough for technologies to be able to leverage new technologies as they become more accessible and more usable. So you really need to think about, and I think this is a question that you might have coming up, is like integration points and architecture of your solution.
So you're exactly right. That is a question coming up. So let's say you have a ERP system, or you're thinking about an ERP system, and eventually, as we're learning here in this discussion, that combining the two is more powerful than just having one or the other sitting there by itself. If I'm looking to buy an ERP system and invest in an IoT system, from a high level, we don't have to get into the bits and bytes, what type of features do you think are important that you should look for in that ERP system to make sure to future-proof it going down the road and make sure that I can integrate it with something else?
I'll throw that one to Rob to start, because I've been talking a lot.
So I would say if you're looking at the application, I mean, we tell prospects and customers all the time that a standard ERP system, a lot of them can do the same things. When you're looking at, can it create an order? Can it create a quote? Can I do a PO? Yeah, you can do all those things, but really looking under the covers and looking at the technology and looking at the software publisher. So if you look at Epicor as a company, you quickly see that technology is a big portion of what they do, but they're really going after what their customers are looking for. So they're constantly engaged with their customers and seeing what they're actually looking to try and solve. And again, not just throwing technology for the sake of technology. So they're looking at some of the customer panels. They're discussing some of the challenges that the manufacturers today are having, and then they're trying to solve them and making sure that software provider is on a constant path to try and solve those problems versus just being stagnant and letting things go past you.
Okay. Are there, and again, not to get into the real guts of this thing from bits and bytes perspective, are there certain, and again, we're not going to name them, but I'm assuming that certain software platforms, there's standards out there in industry that might be advantageous to look at when you're considering the platforms as a whole and being able to integrate things. Is that kind of a true statement, that there's commonality out there that can be used to some degree to make sure that interoperability is going to be available going down the pike?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So from going back to kind of a leadership perspective, if I'm going to do a project where I'm going to implement these two platforms, who should be involved in my company to help make that happen, make sure it's successful?
Well, so I can take that one. So when you look at these implementations, again, I would stress that it's not an IT project. It's not it is a technology project, but not we get into these companies where they say, oh, it's a technology project. We're going to give it to the IT department and they'll take care of it for us. You really need to look at it and say, this is a business project. This is going to change how we run our business from start to finish. And so you're typically pulling in, you know, some of your senior people with experience in your company, a subject matter expert from your, you know, when you start putting your core team together from each area. So somebody from sales, somebody from production, somebody from quality, and really stacking that core team together. And you've got to have people that are empowered, that can make decisions and can drive this thing forward. Because if you just throw it at the IT team and say, here, go do the project, you're going to have a real challenge trying to get this thing over the finish line.
Okay, good points. So are there specific, in you guys' experience, and I'm sure, you know, you've been around doing these projects and these types of implementations a while, what are some of the key stumbling blocks that you see, you know, before they call you guys and get you involved? What have you seen that kind of presents challenges to these companies and maybe take some recovery efforts?
Well, I think we, you know, referred to I think one of the biggest issues that I've seen is that people don't know what they want. They haven't formulated what it is exactly that, you know, they want to measure. What kind of result do they want with this investment in an IoT strategy? And so I think you need to kind of ask yourself first, what is it that I want to do? Do I want to, you know, be more responsive? Do I want to understand, you know, do I want to be alerted about machine failures? Do I, you know, all of these things that IoT can do, you need to define what it is you want them to do. And as I mentioned before, it also is really critical that you have a baseline of how long that process takes you, or what is it that, you know, you're trying to correct, so that when you put your IoT solution in place, you've got a way, you know, something to measure and something to show improvement for. Otherwise, you know, an IoT device is just a sensor that collects data. And unless you understand what data it is you want, you're just going to get a bunch of data and it's not going to be meaningful to you.
So that kind of goes in line with what the keynote speaker, Mike Wojciechowski at Eaton, was mentioning. He had a chart that showed productivity in Northeast Ohio, and it kind of plateaus here for the last 5 years. And one of the key, I think, points he was getting at, goes along with what you're saying, Terry, is that, you know, you got to know what you want to measure and improve on and what you're going to do about it. And this information helps you get down that path. And hopefully, because an IoT solution is going to go hand in hand with your continuous improvement and therefore help elevate your efficiency in your organization.
Yeah. We've seen several instances of people wanting to pilot programs. And so they go into pilots without really defining what it is they want to get out of it. And then they just get stuck. And then, you know, that might be a person with good intentions who wants to bring IoT to their company and show what it can do. But if you do that without a plan, you bring it in and then it kind of just falls flat. You know, once you have it going in pilot, but you haven't set up, you know, what it is that you're trying to prove, and people are like, okay, you know, and they're not seeing the benefit of it. And so I think that's where you see a lot of, you know, projects either get stuck or just, you know, don't move on.
So I guess that's probably one of the big differences between an ERP system and an IIoT, where you can kind of piecemeal an IIoT, but an ERP system is kind of like you're going for broke.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, next slide, Erica.
So this is just an example of, you know, I had been talking about these use cases of IoT widgets or sensors on machines. So this is just a visualization of that in your ERP system. So if you're looking at Epicor ERP and you see that box that's in red on the right, those are widgets to IoT sensors machines, so that within your ERP system, you're able to actively track, you know, what's going on in those machines.
So this shows how you can tie in the IoT with your ERP specifically.
Exactly. Exactly.
Now, for an example like this, in as far as integrating, you know, two systems from two separate companies, Do you think this falls more along do you think it falls more in the ERP supplier or integrator to make that connection happen between an IIoT system that's sitting out there, or is it just depend on the situation?
Well, I mean, I have an answer. I'd be curious to what Rob says, but I do think it's the ERP systems. If you want the data to show up in your ERP system and work with your ERP system, I think the onus is on the ERP system provider to make that work. I don't know, Rob, if you feel differently about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the people with the ERP expertise are the ones that are typically doing the integrations. And you want to make sure that ERP system is your one source of truth. So if you've got 4 different vendors putting their data in 4 different places, then you tend to not have that one source of truth. So if you've got the ERP system being the one source, then you're pulling that data. Pulling the data is relatively easy. I'll use my air quotes, relatively easy from the different devices. It's really a matter of, how do you want to use that data to better the company once you've got it. So Terry's screen here, what is this data being used for? Who am I showing it to? And how am I going to act on it is really the question that you'd have.
Okay, great. Do either of you have any other examples or things you'd like to share with regard just on general use cases? And if not, we can move on to see if we can get some questions from the audience.
Yeah, I don't particularly have another use case to bring up. Terry, do you?
I think we're, for manufacturing, the most use cases I've seen have had to do with remote monitoring of machines. I think, and those are probably the ones that I saw first and I've seen most adoption with, but we're starting to see other little use cases pop up, like, again, things where you're not just monitoring anomalies, but you're actually monitoring different parameters on machines. I'd like to actually see more use cases that are perhaps not just focused on machines, but focused somewhere else. But I'll start where it's easiest out in the machine area.
Okay. Yeah, like I mentioned before at the top of this, it seems to be a topic that I think is gaining interest with companies, and how you get this information together and best utilize it in an effective way to make the whole system stronger. All right, so we can dive into some questions from the audience out there. It looks like we have one teed up. So scalability in a system is most important with smaller companies and allows less risk to get started. How does Epicor address scalability?
I would say first of all, Epicor's sweet spot is really working with smaller companies, and I would say the reason we do so well with that is because we have a system that is, you don't have to invest all at once. You can start with our core ERP system and then add on the modules that address your most pressing business issues first. And, I call it kind of land and expand your solution. So first make sure that the core works and take your time with that. And then, expand into the other solutions if you need to. If you're a smaller company and you don't need all of the other solutions, that's fine as well. Maybe all you need is just the core financials connected, to something else if you want to use IIoT. So I would say that's the benefit of Epicor, is that you're really able to kind of pick and choose and I would say really, kind of pick the solution that you want out of all of the various solutions available from the Epicor ERP portfolio.
Okay, great. I've got some more
Rob,
questions.
I don't know if you've got anything to add to that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, you can also walk before you run. You you can take on an integration like this and really, let's just say, focus on one machine or two machines as a beta. If again, to Terry's point, you need to make sure the business reasons are there. But once you've got them there, take it on one or two machines at a time. Make sure you're getting that benefit. And once you can prove out the financial benefit to your company or the efficiency benefit, now you can roll it out to the rest of the facility. You don't have to do it all on a big bang approach.
Yeah, and I would also mention cloud. That's something that a lot of our smaller companies are starting to really see the benefit of. All of the benefits that you get from not having to manage, your in-house servers and systems. And so, our solution, Epicor solution, is the same in the cloud as it is on premises. And so, you're getting you're getting the best solution, either deployments that you choose. But smaller companies a lot like to choose cloud because of the economic benefits of it. And so I would say that's a big consideration as well.
Okay, so here's another question, kind of timely from that last comment. Many companies collect sensor measurements in files not necessarily stored in the cloud, but rather stored in an on-site computer or server. Would this practice be considered an IIoT system? So I guess the question is, just because it's not going up to the cloud, but you're still collecting sensor data or machine data, does that mean it's not an IIoT system just because you're storing it on site?
If I'm understanding the question, I think that you can collect the data from wherever it is, as long as that IIoT. So you've got the sensor, and the way that it works with Epicor is the sensor takes that data and sends it up to Epicor's IoT Hub. IoT Hub interfaces with Microsoft's IoT, Azure IoT Hub, which has many, many different ways of translating data. And then it goes up into your Epicor ERP system as something that's readable within ERP. If he's talking about, what if your data is stored on a system, as long as your sensor or your system is able to pull that data from your on-site system and bring it in somehow into the cloud or into your Epicor ERP system, I think it's still IoT, but I'm not sure.
Well,
it really. Go ahead, Rob.
No, I was just going to say you can get into the specific definition, but at the end of the day, I would agree with you, Terry. You're pulling data from a device, you're reading it into your ERP. In my book, it would qualify.
Yeah, I don't think it matters where you store it. It's just
that's right.
Are collecting it. Okay, so we've got another question. Can you define an IIoT system?
Well, that's a really broad question, but an IIoT system. So the kind of basic definition, IoT, Internet of Things, right? It's the thing that's connecting things to other things through the cloud. So when you think of general IoT, there's all sorts of consumer IoT applications, right, that we carry on our mobile device that ping us when somebody goes to our front door and we see our ring, come up, or our refrigerator tells us that the door's open and we get an alert, on our phone. Those are basic IoT systems. When you talk about IIoT, that's industrial IoT. So these are kind of I would say more machine focused, factory focused applications that you're able to take that data and I think make more actionable and focused on more manufacturing and machine type industrial processes. So I think that's kind of the difference. I'm not sure if you want us to define exactly what the system would look like. We had a slide like that where I was just explaining about how it works with the data flow of the data flow from the sensor into your into your Epicor ERP system. But that's kind of the basic definition.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's basically industrial IoT is having various types of sensors and devices out in your factory floor collecting data that you can that means something to you from a business perspective and that you can make decisions off of.
And even kind of thinking bigger, it could even encompass beyond your factory floor, your field equipment. It can encompass the supply chain. So it's kind of end to end. It could also start with order processing. You know, there are some AIs that Eva is one that can start orders. So I would say, you know, it's anything that touches touches the process within a manufacturer, from kind of order entry all the way to, you know, product retirement.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see if we got something else here. How about from a ERP perspective, do you think that ERP platforms are changing in any way in order to be better targets for IoT integration?
I'll take that from an integration perspective, Terry, and then you can take it from a publisher perspective. From my side of it, working with the companies that I work with, again, it's all around what can we do to automate our process. And if they can take that data and do something with it to automate the process, that's one less thing they have to have an employee do in a time when they're struggling to get these skilled workers. So yeah, I definitely see the customers moving in that direction. And I would say, you know, certainly Epicor moving in the direction where if we can take that data and automate a process, that's one less thing we need to do with a human.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, ERP is changing. You know, technology is changing. We are no longer in a cadence where major enterprise systems are updated every 18 months to 2 years, right? We are in a rapid development, rapid, you know, delivery timeline now. And so something like Epicor, for example, we have releases every 6 months, and that's in order to keep up with our competition, to allow our customers to keep up with competition, and to keep delivering the newest technologies to our customers. But when you have a paradigm shift like that, you know, that means that you can't maybe have as many customizations as you were used to having, you know, and so, you know, that's a big shift in technology for ERP. Epicor has been known for customizations, and we've had to, you know, kind of culturally shift and understand that, you know, we can't, as we evolve as a business, that's not where technology is going. It's really moving to a model, I kind of call it the iPhone model, right? Where you get an iPhone, you know, many millions of people have iPhones. They all look the same, but when you look at everyone's iPhone, it looks different. And so that's the difference between, I think, customization and personalization. And so, you know, you'll start to see with Epicor ERP, we're starting to evolve, where we're moving to, especially for cloud, where, you know, I kind of call it like the 85-15 or 90-10 rule, where 90% of the technology that you'll see and that you'll get will be set, but you'll have enough 10%, 15% to be able to personalize it for you. So you'll be able to, for example, in this slide, put the widgets on your homepage that are important to you. And so those are like little, you know, those are changes that we are seeing, and that we are coaching our customers and really, you know, kind of shifting the mindset, in that you don't need all of this very expensive, very long, very difficult customizations that are hard to upgrade every time we have an upgrade. And now we're talking every 6 months. But, you know, when you talk about personalization, those are configurations that happen outside of the code. It happens kind of above the code layer, so you're not going to the code. So these are things that are easily upgradable, easy to bring along from upgrade to upgrade. So that's kind of, I would say, one big shift. And then the other one, especially as it relates to the user experience, and you know, I love what Rob is saying about the worker turnover, but it's all about the user experience. And with Epicor, we have made a huge investment in making the user experience much better for our customers. And a big driver of that, and I've said it before, is because of this workforce turnover, and that companies are having a hard enough time attracting workers. And when they get them there, they don't have the luxury of having months for these guys to train. They need to get them going right away. And so one of the ways that you can do that is by having a system that is intuitive for them, that matches the experience that they have on their mobile devices, on their iPads, on other applications, consumer grade applications that they use, so that they're already familiar with it, and it's not going to take as much time for them to understand how to use it and how to get used to the system. So those are the kind of two big things, as I would say, the shift from customization to personalization, and then the real, importance of having a modern, intuitive user experience that is also available on mobile devices. Mobility is also a big thing.
Thanks for that insight. So Erica's given us the high sign that we're just about out of time. So on that note, I think I'm going to say thank you very much to Rob and Terri for participating and providing their experiences to us today. Really appreciate it. And thanks to everybody else that has joined in to participate and hear what these experts have to say. So thanks, and hopefully everybody have a good rest of their day and evening.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,